This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
This is Basketball History 101 with Rick Loayza.
Welcome back to award-winning Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network. I am your host, Rick Loayza, and this is the podcast where we bring to life some of the forgotten stories from basketball history. We are bringing old-school basketball to a new-school audience, and today we bring you the story of ABA contracts. Now, I am a huge fan of the old ABA, and maybe you are too, so I will just give you a quick recap. The ABA started as a professional basketball league in the autumn of 1967, and they played for 9 seasons and then merged with the NBA in 1976. The original group of owners in the ABA originally wanted to be part of the NBA, but getting into the NBA is not that easy. You cannot just be in the NBA because you want to be in the NBA, no matter how much money you have. So let us go through a hypothetical situation. Let us pretend for a moment that you have the money to purchase an NBA team, and there is a team for sale. Now, that is not enough to complete the purchase. When you go to buy a house, the only 2 parties that need to agree on a price are the buyer and the seller, and then the deal is done. But buying an NBA team is much more complicated. Assume for a moment that you, as the buyer of the NBA team, agree to a price with the seller. Well, that part is all fine and good, but the NBA is a very small and exclusive club. The sale of an NBA team will require the approval of at least 22 of the other 29 owners. So even if you have the money, you cannot just be an NBA owner unless 75% of the existing owners approve you to join their exclusive group. Now that was what those original ABA owners were up against back in 1967. They wanted to be in the NBA but were not allowed to join. So they got together and started their own league. Their goal from the very beginning was to grow the ABA to the point where they could force a merger with the NBA and thereby become NBA owners. They took their inspiration from the American Football League. The NFL is the biggest professional American football league in the United States, but back in 1960, a brand new league was created to directly compete with the NFL, and that league was the American Football League, or AFL. And after a few years, they grew to the point where the 2 leagues were playing exhibition games or friendlies against each other. Later, they agreed to have their respective league champions play each other for some sort of a super championship. And that was how the Super Bowl got started. Even after the 2 leagues merged together in 1970, they still called the championship game the Super Bowl. Now, this is what gave the ABA owners the motivation to start a league to rival the NBA and hopefully force them into a merger. But starting a new league is not that easy. If the ABA was going to become a respected league, then they were going to need some really good players. Unfortunately, all of the really good players were already signed to contracts with the NBA. So the ABA started to sign players whose talent was just short of NBA caliber. And they signed other players like Doug Moe and Connie Hawkins, who did have NBA talent, but had been banned by the NBA over gambling accusations. Then they did something that not even the NBA had done at that time. The NBA had their own rule that they would not sign a player until his class graduated from university. And this is why Will Chamberlain left the University of Kansas after only 3 years, but could not go directly to the NBA. The rest of his class still had 1 more year to go. So Chamberlain played with the Globetrotters for that year until he could enter the NBA with the Philadelphia Warriors. But the ABA could make its own rules. They decided to start going after the best college players early, and their largest signing, of course, was Julius Erving, better known as Dr. J. They were able to sign him out of the University of Massachusetts after only 3 years of college, and they offered him more money than he had ever seen. In reality, the strategy of the ABA was to offer these players more money than what they could earn in the NBA. I mean, you would have to in order to get the best players. They had to do something to convince these players to leave the established league and go with an upstart league. After all, the ABA was at a bit of a disadvantage. The ABA were not going to be able to play in arenas like Madison Square Garden or Chicago Stadium. In the ABA, they were going to play in much smaller facilities in front of much smaller crowds, at least at first. So money was going to make the difference. However, the ABA did not have a massive war chest of funds from which to pay these players, so they had to get creative with how these contracts were structured. That is where a former professional basketball player named Ralph Dolgoff enters this story. Since his playing days, he had become an accountant and had come up with a very ingenious way to pay the players large salaries without having to put in a lot of money. And this is a good place to take a break, and I'll be right back with more on how Dolgoff's idea worked.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with the retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorum Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.
Hello, sports history fans. I'm Ross from the podcast Pigskin Tales. You're about to jump into another thrilling sports history moment, but first, let's dive into today's sponsor, just in time for the holiday season. Introducing Art of Words, the brainchild of word artist Dan Duffy from Philadelphia. Dan meticulously crafts stunning images by handwriting relevant words from some of the greatest sports moments in time. These unique budget-friendly illustrations are the perfect gift, sparking cherished memories and capturing hearts. Choose from city skylines, sports, history, and musicians to find a piece for everyone. And here's the exciting part. For that sports fanatic in your life, gift them a piece of their favorite team or player's history. Art of Words tells a compelling story. Explore collegiate stadiums, each meticulously crafted with every football victory etched into words. Or venture into baseball stadiums, handwritten with every player from the team's illustrious history. My favorite on the site is Bryce Harper 2021 MVP year. Because I'm a big stats guy, I think that's one of the coolest things ever. Check it out. Don't wait. Order a print today for yourself and your loved one this holiday season. Transform your wall into a gallery of captivating art and surprise your family and friends with a print of their own. Use code SHN15 at artofwords.com for a 15% discount on your order in November and December. Visit Art of Words, where words magically transform into stunning art, evoking cherished memories and touching the hearts of those who you care about. Again, use the code SHN15 for 15% off at artofwords.com.
Welcome back to the show, and let us continue with the story of ABA contracts. Ralph Dolgoff was a neighbor of Norm Drucker, an NBA referee, and Dolgoff also worked with the ABA to develop a way to pay players using an annuity, also known as deferred payment. Now, here is what I mean. In the NBA, when they say that they're going to pay a player $100,000 per year, they actually give the player $100,000 each year, minus taxes, deductions, and some other fees. You know, the way that normal stuff that comes out of anyone's paycheck. But the ABA had a different idea. If the ABA said that they were going to pay a player $100,000 for the year, then they would often pay the player only $50,000 for the year minus taxes and deductions, and then the other $50,000 would be paid out at some point in the future. Sometimes it was as long as 10 or even 20 years in the future, because in reality, the ABA teams did not have the same amount of money available to pay players as the NBA did. But they had to do something to attract these players. So if a team team wanted to give a player $50,000 to be paid 20 years in the future, they only needed to put in about $15,000 or $20,000 into an investment fund that would mature and in 20 years begin paying out the player the $50,000 that they were promised. In other words, it was a way to pay a player $50,000 but only needing $20,000 to do it. It was a win-win. The player gets paid, eventually, and the team saves money in the short run on the salary that they promised. Ralph Dolgoff was the guy who made this possible. Now, as I mentioned, he was a former professional basketball player, but he was also an incredibly creative accountant who understood tax law in the United States like few other accountants. He had created this deferred payment plan originally as a way of saving on taxes, and he did this well before the ABA even existed. But then he realized that his idea would work perfectly for ABA teams trying to pay their players but who were short on funds. It actually became a joke in NBA circles. They would read in the newspaper that a certain player landed a 5-year contract with an NBA team that paid him $1.5 million. In the late 1960s, that size of a contract was absolutely dwarfing anything that the NBA was offering. But the NBA players knew that that ABA player might only receive a third of that contract while he played, and the rest was not going to be paid till 20 years in the future. Most ABA players did not realize that at the time that they were signing those contracts. Many had no idea that it would take as long as 30 years before they saw the full payment of the contract. In other words, the players were not really walking around with the amounts that they were being reported in the newspaper. Because let me tell you, these contract announcements were making headlines in sports sections of the newspaper. So if the headline said that a player was making $1 million, then people assumed that player actually had $1 million. But that is far from the truth. Even the amounts that were supposed to be paid during the season were hard to come by. The ABA was a very weird place in the 1970s. On payday, the players were all handed checks, typically during a Friday practice, and in many cases, the players would then sprint to their cars and speed to their respective banks to be the first to cash their checks. The reason is that many ABA teams were behind on their payroll, or the payroll was underfunded. Sometimes only the first 4 or 5 players to get to the bank would get their money, and the rest of the players would see their checks bounce, at which point they would storm into the office of the general manager or owner demanding their payment. It was crazy in the NBA. In one case, the team told the players that in lieu of a cash payment, they could take the office furniture and sell it for whatever they could get, which is exactly what they did. The ABA was a cash-strapped league from the beginning, but they were making a dent into the NBA's reputation. The ABA began playing exhibition games against NBA teams, and the ABA was winning as many of those games as they were losing. In other words, it was fairly even. The NBA had to acknowledge that the best ABA teams were as good as the best NBA teams. Eventually, that is what forced the merger in 1976. If the NBA had full knowledge of the financial struggles of the ABA, then they may not have merged at all. They could have just waited until the ABA ran out of money and went out of business. So, congratulations to the ABA for forcing that merger. Many of these former ABA players were still receiving deferred payments into the 1990s for games that they had played in the 1970s. But that is the way it went with the ABA. But from the perspective of a fan, the league was amazing. They played some really good basketball. It was fun and exciting, with lots of dunking, and that brand new three-point line was something else. It was just a shame that more people did not get to see the ABA in person. Well, that is it for today. Join us next time when we share the story of the popularity of high school basketball in the state of Indiana. That's next time on Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of Sports Yesteryear. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com to find out more about this and other sports history podcasts. If you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. And check out our page on Facebook. It's called Basketball History 101 Podcast. There you will find shorter historical posts as well as comments and discussion starters on today's game. I'll also announce there when new episodes come out. I want to thank my producer and editor, Jacob Loayza. Join us each week as we continue to mine the history of basketball for more great stories from the past. Take care and see you soon.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, And I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.